Howdy, howdy, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad to be back with you post-hurricane down here in the Houston area. We
He's
had quite
alive.
the adventure. Yep, I made it. I made it through. But yeah, it's been an adventure down here, and lots of people still struggling with recovering. And so we're helping where we can, and glad that we actually have electric and internet back up. So glad for that, and glad to be with you. Glad you had Terry and Christine to carry the torch for us last week, and glad to be back and able to jump in on this topic we advertised and then re-advertised. So I'm Doug Goethe, for those who don't remember, the founder and principal consultant of People Smart Group, and also the founder of the Organizational Health Collective, here with my good friend Terry.
And I'm Dr. Terry Wager with Generator Consulting, and I'm a member of the Organizational Health Collective, and it's just fun working with a group of people and connecting with a group of people. I had a private practice in psychology for clinical psychology for a number of years, and it was a very lonely experience when I made the change. One of the biggest reasons I made the change is because I wanted a group of people who I could work with because we're better together. And so if you're looking to be a little bit better, find some people to do it together with. And if the Organizational Health Collective is that, then seek us out.
Absolutely. Great way to put it there, Terry. Thanks. And we're thrilled to be here on a weekly basis, getting to talk about topics that have to do with both from the consulting side, consultants helping companies, but then even more importantly, probably from the company side, companies really having to process and work through, why is this going on? Why am I dealing with this? How do I change it? How do I adjust things? And we're diving into that on a weekly and daily basis. And so we'd like to get to share a little bit of the things that we're learning or know, or a little of our knowledge. So it's a great opportunity for us, and we hope it's a help to you. And so that's our goal. Today we're going to talk about agreement. And wait, we don't have alignment. Why are things not happening the way I expected? We all agreed in the meeting what happened here. So that is
that what we're talking about? Because I'm not sure. I'm just kidding.
Oh, see, we have no alignment here on the show.
And so there is no alignment. This show is going sideways down the road.
Right? I thought we agreed, Terry. What's the problem?
That's right. We did agree.
What gets in the way of meetings?
What were we talking about that we agreed to? And honestly, that's the funny thing is that's actually exactly what we're talking about. And we do have alignment, by the way. We did talk about this before. We didn't just shoot from the hip like usual. No. And so I love this topic, and I think about, I was kidding about going down the road, but I think about that with cars where they don't have alignment, and they shimmy and shift all over the road. They wear the tires out. And funny enough, when we don't have alignment, that happens in relationships too, as they start to shimmy and shift. And people have different ideas. So what's on your mind about this?
Well, as I think about it, I mean, some of the things I think about are just, one, the impact of it, right? It leads to what happens when we think we've agreed in a meeting, but we all leave. Is one, it leads to a politics and a backbiting, and well, that wasn't my idea. I wasn't in agreement with that. I don't care. So people leave a meeting and they're not really on the same page. They leave a decision made and they go, well, that's your decision. That's your problem. And they're not really committed. So it lacks commitment to the decision we made and we were going to go forward with. And we don't figure it out till down the line when people are sort of alligator arming it. They're not really going for it and trying to catch the ball in a sports sense, but instead they're just sort of putting forth a little bit of effort just to look like they're doing their job, but they're really not committed to the idea. And so that's one obstacle I see. And then the other I was thinking about the negatives of it is what it portrays is a lack of willingness to push in on each other. And so we're not willing to disagree in the meeting. And so we agree, but we're not actually all on the same page. because we're just not willing to go there. I'm not willing to tell you, Terry, that I don't like your idea. And so I'm not
Right.
going to go there.
Right. And it's funny. I have a couple of companies I'm working with, and I think about these in two different areas. The first company is, I'm not going to say what it is, but a restaurant. I'm not going to say what it is, but they have a number of locations, and there's alignment when we're talking in our meetings, but
Yep.
then there's no execution.
Yeah.
And there's alignment and agreement, in fact. And so there's another underlying issue with that, and that is the fear of conflict. And
Yep.
so it's funny because, Doug, I agree with you 100%. This is exactly what we need to do, and this is exactly what we should be doing. And in fact, I want to do it 100% tomorrow. Not right now. We got to wait a week. We got to wait till the stars align and nobody's going to be mad at me.
We'll work on that after I get these 15 things done first.
Yes. And it's funny because it's a fear of conflict. And as a result, now I'm not taking the action I need to. I'm losing money.
Yeah.
I'm terrified that something bad or worse is going to happen. Meanwhile, I'm getting more and more resentful at the people that I'm dealing with that I need to take action with, but I'm so worried about the confrontation and how I'll look or how it'll be received or how things are going to play out that I'd rather just avoid it altogether.
Yeah. Yep.
And I have a client going through that, and it's hell.
Man. Yep. Yeah, I was just thinking too, there's also times that I've seen where it's even beyond just the conflict, where people see their need for something and everyone will agree they need to do it. But the cost of it emotionally, the cost of it in terms of dealing with chaos or dealing with hard issues. And again, this fits with conflict, but it kind of presses even beyond that of, hey, I just don't want to pay that cost. I don't want to enter into that situation. And but whether that be conflict with another person or I've got to drudge up all the crap that I got to deal with, and I don't want to deal with that. I'd rather just put my head down and keep going the way I'm going.
Yeah. And it'll sort itself out, hopefully.
Right.
Hopefully this will work out.
But it works out the wrong way usually.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but that does happen. And it's really when we have agreement and we have alignment, but we don't have action behind it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because we don't have alignment. Some they're right on board with it, but it's that fear of executing on it. And so while they're aligned, they can't move forward. And that's an emotional issue. I mean, it's fear.
Yeah.
And the reality is when that happens, we got to step into the fear and we got to step into the discomfort and we got to step into it anyway. And it's very difficult. And that's where, hand-holding comes in a little bit. And really, that's where, a lot of people have found a lot of value in working with me around that emotional issue, because the fact of the matter is everybody has that to one degree or another. And if you've ever procrastinated or you've ever hesitated or you've ever just tried to figure something out, those are 3 signs of fear getting in the way of progress. And what we do, well, I gotta strategize this more. I gotta figure it out. I've got to go back and think about it. And when we're doing that, we're actually talking ourselves out of the move forward. And we're really just biding time between dropping the hammer on an idea I'm afraid is going to be poorly received, or it's not going to work, or something like that. And so if I can think about it now, I don't have to actually do anything about it. And so I find that that's a big reason why we do fail to execute, even when we have agreement and alignment, we're on the same
Mhm.
page. I just can't do it.
Yeah. Yep.
And then
Well,
the other thing that follows, if you have agreement and alignment and you can't pull the trigger, the next thing that follows is shame.
mm,
And you start beating yourself up because you know what you should be doing and you're not doing it, and you can't allow yourself to step into that. And so we start beating ourselves up, which is, another problem all in itself that really, really needs to be addressed. Whether you find a therapist and go, "What's going on with me?" or you find somebody like one of us that can walk you through it and go, "Let's have a little bit more faith and
mhm.
take care of business the way it needs to be, even if we're scared and even if we're feeling like it's not going to work, or we're feeling inferior, or we're feeling powerless. Let's empower you by taking that step."
Yep.
And
Well,
most often
I
it
I
takes
think
care of itself.
I think one of the problems with that is there are so many organizations that everything you just said is a conversation we don't want to have with the other people in the room. I don't want to talk about my feelings. I'm here to
Absolutely.
work. I don't care about feel. I don't want to get down to that level. And so I don't really want to, I don't want to get in that. And honestly, the deal is you're going to deal with the chaos and the difficulty now, or you're going to deal with it later in much bigger form. It's going to be exponential by the time you deal with it if you just ignore it and push it under the rug. And if we can't have that kind of conversation that says, hey, you know what is holding you back? Then we can't make a real decision and we can't really be aligned. And so we need that level of trust that says, hey, you know what? I can share that right now I'm fearful of this, or right now I don't know what it is, but there's something holding me back emotionally about this idea. Even if we can't name it, we've got to be able to have that conversation within the room. Because if we can't get down to that, then yes, we're all just going to be yes.
Yes. I think my friend Doug froze. And so I completely agree, and I don't know what to do about this. But hey, we'll just keep going. So the other thing I think about that is very interesting is another of my clients had this issue where when they were looking at explaining what they did, they thought they were all on the same page, but every one of them agreed out loud. But when you ask them what they do and they ask them how they are doing their business or what they're doing, they all had different answers. And it was really interesting because the different answers, how that showed up was that my clients uh, had they had a very, very high powered client, and this is a construction company, and they were working for this high powered client who does a lot of business with huge corporations. And they said, okay, so we don't understand your brand. And the interesting thing is the other the, my clients were like trying to explain it, and whenever each of the clients was talking about what they did and why they did it, they all had a little bit different answer. And their client said, see, that's the problem, you guys don't have a vision. And they do,
Hmm.
and they just don't communicate it the same way. And they didn't really spend the time that I have suggested they spend on vision, or why we exist and how we behave and the promise of their that they're delivering. And they thought they did. And this is really interesting, is every one of them thought they did this. And they thought that they were clear on why they exist as a business. They thought that they knew exactly what they did. They thought they had all of that they're presenting, and they have three different statements of what it is. And when this particular individual, he worked for a big movie corporation, asked him about it, he's like, this is why you guys aren't getting the business that you could be getting, which is 100% true. And then they came back to me, of course, and they go, oh, well, this is why we're not getting the business. And I said, I know. And we've talked about this. And you guys even agreed, but you've never really taken the time to get aligned on it. And so let's do this. And it's funny because they were very aligned, but they didn't have the communication around it. And so they were in a little bit of frenzy mode and a little bit of grind and a little bit of hustle and a little bit of just go forward and things will work itself out, which honestly, I think that that's the better way to go rather than try to hesitate and think about what's next. To just go is a really good idea because the speed does kind of cure a lot of issues. But they weren't clear on that each other were saying different things.
Yep.
And so we spent some time with them actually this weekend, and we went over why we exist. We went over how we behave. We went over what do we do, and we went over how we succeed. And it's funny because when we started doing that, well, let me say this. Before we started doing that, one of the team members is like, so the vision is the mission and the mission is the vision. And I'm not sure why we're going around in circles like this, but it's very confusing. And then people are talking about promise, and I don't know what this means. By the way, he was a person that bought into the company, and he's one of the people that is very, very strong with what he does in the company, but he hasn't ever really done any of that work because he's always been a boots on the ground kind of guy. So what he was joking about it, but he's like, no, in all seriousness, I really don't know what the difference is. I really don't know why it matters. And I really, this is one of the biggest frustrations I have is people keep telling me this and I don't know what it means. And so I spent a little bit of time explaining to him the idea of vision and North Star and why we exist is that thing that gets you up in the morning, and what do we do is really separated. It's what we actually are doing. And then the values, or for me, the behaviors that we value, what do we want to see from you, are the thing that kind of locks those two together. But the culture is all around why we exist and how we behave. And he's like, oh, okay, so where does promise fit in? And I was like, promise is the outcome that you're delivering. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, we promise that you're going to have this, that, and the other thing as a result of working with us. He's like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. And then he got on board. So he agreed, and then we got alignment, and then we got on board. And it was probably the fastest session of doing that. All three of them in this were amazing with it. And it was funny because we had a WG, we had an IE, and we had a DT. Right. And so together it was all widget. And watching this was amazing because they all played their roles of widget extremely well. And when they were coming up with things, the wonder was bringing up wonder, and the inventor was bringing up the inventor, and the discerner was getting up and leaving. He's like, I don't want to do this, but when you guys got it, let me know. And you know, he's a DT. He wants to discern and wants to have it down and done. And it's like he'd keep getting up and like, I can't handle what you guys are talking about. But he'd come back and go, oh, I like that. Oh, that's not quite right. Yes, that is. And so it was amazing to watch the working genius at play in this process. So if you ever had a chance to actually do working genius while you're doing 6 questions, it's amazing. But my bigger point that took 20 minutes is that they had what they thought was agreement, but they weren't aligned in how they talked about what they were doing, although they all kind of agreed, but they didn't know the importance of communicating alignment.
That's good. Thanks, dear. I missed part of that because my internet decided I shouldn't be on, but otherwise, I love what you had to
Yeah,
say.
I know. And I was like, oh no, Doug's gone. Oh, I better take it over.
The hurricane and its
We did
effect.
not come to agreement or alignment on how to handle that situation. And so I was like,
We
I
have
guess
not.
I'll talk. Uh,
The
but
hurricane came back to bite me again.
round two. Um,
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's really interesting how this stuff shows up. So how have you seen just in the businesses you worked with, or even in the collective, maybe
Mhm.
because we see that um,
Yeah.
we get agreement, but maybe alignment is lacking, or we're aligned on stuff, but we can't agree with what we're aligning on. I'm not exactly sure how that works. Uh,
Yeah.
feign agreement. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's your
Yeah.
experience with?
I've had a couple different organizations I've been working with recently, and I mean, I've seen this, especially in one of them where you've got two different people who are saying the same things, but when we drill deeper, you realize what they're saying might match, but what they're meaning by it doesn't match at all. And so, and it was interesting because we got into their working geniuses as well, and the difference between the two was quite interesting. Um, because one's an ET and then one's a DG. And so, the DG is ready to, make decisions, figure things out, and then go. The ET
Let's
wanted to
go.
get on the ground and just do things. Let's stop. Let's not do this. And so seeing the different disagreement between those two was interesting to see. And as a facilitator, my job was keep bringing them back up to those 6 questions and going, wait a second here, we've got to determine, get you clear on this so that we're aligned, so that we do these things together and we're all on the same page. And it was an ongoing difficulty for me to have to keep bringing them back up. So we got a comment by Michael Weiland. I love this. Shared
Yeah,
communication definitions are essential to strategy development as well as execution. That is, yep, fantastic. Great
absolutely.
work, Michael. Thank you. For sure, that reality that we're all, how we communicate and what we're communicating needs definition. And if we could just be talking in total different directions, even saying the same thing. So it's wild how, and as a facilitator, that's a challenge, right? You're facilitating a group and you want to make sure that we're really clear on what we're communicating and how we're
Yeah,
saying it.
absolutely. It's one of the areas that I think Christine and I found really quickly when we started working together is we have to go, okay, when you say good, what does that mean? Or
Mhm.
when you say fine, what does that mean? What does
Yep.
this word mean? So we are defining it together so that we
Yep.
understand and we're not going two different ways, thinking we've
Yeah.
agreed. And it's
Yep.
really, and I find it happens a lot with labels. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
and so we label something as finished. Well, what does finished look like?
Yep. Yep. Well, and the other piece, I think that's one of the beauties for those ETs out there who don't really like to get into that brainstorming place. It's one of the beauties of the brainstorming place because we're throwing things out and then we're saying, well, how do we define that? What does that really look like? And so we're pushing people within those 6 questions to say, okay, this is your why. Well, what does that mean? How does that play out? What does that look like? So that we can really get to the point of drill down into what are we really meaning by what's our why? And then the same thing for those values, right? We could use all sorts of words, but I'm constantly telling people, I'm like, hey, this isn't about the word you choose. We're not doing a marketing exercise here. We're actually getting to what the meaning, the depth of what is the quality, the character qualities of the people you actually want your company to be represented by.
I think
Who are you?
that's
Who are you? How do you live?
I think that's so important is that idea of the difference between a marketing statement and the reality of how we're actually um, building communication and building understanding within the infrastructure of us, not
Yep.
just what we're trying to say to the public. And
Yep.
they may reflect each other, of course, but if we just go for marketing message, it's never going to have any depth or weight to it. Um,
Yep.
and Michael again said another statement. I'm going to put it up there.
Yep.
And he said, I facilitated a retreat for a nonprofit board where we discovered there was no agreement among the board members on organizational history as documented in the organization's website.
Mhm.
That's really interesting because what can happen is people start resenting each other and they're not talking about it, or they are talking about it in the wrong areas. But that's an interesting kind of situation where you have it on your website and you don't agree.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, now what do we do? And
Yep.
and now how do we proceed? And so that's a really good example, Michael. Thank you for putting that out there. And so how do we build alignment then?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, well, let's go to agreement. One of the things that I found is super valuable, and I don't know where I learned this, but I learned this like freaking 15, 20 years ago when I was doing groups. I think I was working I think I was in the prison system at the time. And we'd have agreement, and then people would not follow through with what they're supposed to be doing. And I thought we had agreement, but what would happen is people kind of either nod their head or no real noise coming out of them. And so I just, okay, if everybody agrees, we move forward, right? Well, I found that we weren't getting anywhere. And so what I did is I said, okay, silence or a head nod or even a yes without reasoning equals disagreement.
Yep. That's good.
And I did this because I was tired of everybody pretending to agree. And so I said, unless I can really understand and get on board with why you agree, you're disagreeing. And so any meeting we had to go around and talk about whatever we were agreeing to, and this is the staff that we were working with and the different people on the treatment teams and things. If you're in agreement, we're going to understand why. And if you're disagreement, we're going to understand why, but nobody leaves until we understand, and silence is disagreement.
Yep.
And it was amazing how everybody started talking because they wanted to get the hell out of that room.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
So
that's a helpful norm for a meeting, right? I mean, that's again one of those things we work with teams on is what are the norms for our meetings, and to be able to say, hey, silence is disagreement. So if you're not going to speak up, we're going to stay here until you do, because we need to know whether you agree or not.
Right. And some people may have felt like that was strong arming them, but once people got over that beginning feeling of, oh God, now I have to say something, stage fright, they started contributing. The meetings got really rich with information, and the people who weren't actually sharing had the most to say a lot of times. And so that's how I dealt with making sure that agreement was real. So,
well, and the hard part for that for a leader is it takes work, right? So it took you work to actually draw everyone out.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's not the hard part of the work. The work's not the hard part. The being indicated as the troublemaker. And,
right. Yeah.
I mean, here we go again. I'm the troublemaker again. I've played this role, black sheep. I'm the designated troublemaker a lot. I think it's the DG in me. But we tend to be disruptors because we do that discernment and then galvanize people to see it in a different way or say more about it or whatever. And it does get to be very tumultuous here and there. But that's the fear part, is really having to talk about it more. So how do we get alignment?
Great question. So I think some of the key things, well, one point I wanted to make is going back to those 6 questions as well. One of the things I push people to do is not use common words a lot of times. Not just say, oh, I want people who are humble. Well, what do you mean by humble? Right. And so I push them to say, okay, I want you to give me a short 2-3 word phrase, and then let's define it so that you're defining what this word means, because far too often we use a common word and then all of a sudden we're at different places, right? And so that's a difficulty. So getting to alignment really means we've got to talk at multiple levels, right? We don't need to just say we agree on a word or we agree on the basics of a decision, but we really have to press down into, are we then leaving here to do X, Y, and Z? Where are we at on this? What does this do? What does this mean that we agree to this? and pressing down further into it rather than just go, okay, we're all agreed, we're out.
Yeah.
And far too often, what we're looking for is we're pressing to agreement, and once we've got it, we want to move on, as opposed to, hey, do we really have, we're all on the same page?
Yes. And it's I like that you're saying that, and that kind of went back to labels, especially with the idea of humble. Is like, okay, what is humble? What does humble look like to you? What does it look like to you? What does it look like to you? How do we know when humble is in the room? And I like that, and I think that that's also what we want to do is start looking at those 6 questions as a way to gain alignment. I think that's actually the business alignment tool.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. At a very high level, we've got to be there. And then the next piece, I think, is having a communication tool at the end of your meetings, right? Where you start thinking through, okay, what decisions did we make? What do we need to communicate? What do we need to not communicate? And then what do we need to process further or hold on to and continue to stew on? And as we do that, and then what actions do we have to take out of this, right? And so when we have those moments at the end where we really solidify and recap before we leave a meeting, everyone leaves on the same page much better, because we now know, hey, I've got to go communicate to my direct reports. These are the words I'm supposed to communicate. It's the heart of what I'm communicating. These are the actions we're going to take. And these are things we're not communicating yet or at all. And these are the things we really got to keep working through before we can really communicate it. And so
Absolutely.
now we don't go giving mixed messages down the line to everyone else in the group, and everyone on our teams, but we actually have a marching orders. And so too many times a meeting ends without marching orders.
Right.
And I think that's the key piece, communication wise in particular. Sometimes we have marching orders in terms of, oh, you do this, you do that, you do that. But we don't always have the clarity of what are we communicating? What does it look like? Who are we communicating to? Those kinds of things. So we just all walk out with that.
Absolutely. And I think that, of course, tone and knowing how you're coming across when you're saying stuff like that, because it's funny when I'm talking to one of my clients, I talked about them before, they're a little bit more fearful. And so I'm a little more forceful with them in saying, this needs to be done.
Yep.
This is what's got to happen. And then I'm like, really hardcore, like, you got to fire them, you got to do this, you got to do that, right? And then I go, okay, now, but when we're in the situation,
yep,
we don't go the way I'm talking to you about that situation. We go from a place of understanding and caring and helping them to understand that maybe it's time for them to move on or something like that, and we do it in the empathic way we want to receive it. But when we're looking at the business and we're looking at the numbers and we're looking at the pluses and minuses and what has to happen, it's cold. There's no emotion in it. We're just looking at the numbers and seeing that type of person, or that particular person, I mean, is not pulling their weight, and they haven't been for a while. And so we really need to be able to go, okay, that person needs to go. Now, that's in the decision-making process of what's going on with this business. They've cost us thousands and thousands of dollars. They're wasting money, they're stealing money, whatever they're doing. Okay, that's gone. Now we go out into facing the public, so to speak, and we are empathic and we are understanding. We are appreciative of where they're at, even if we were wronged in some way. And that happens a lot, is like, I'm wrong, so I'm going to go wrong you back. We can't do that. They're like, no, I'm wronged, and so we can't keep this going. But we appreciate where you're at and whatever you told yourself was a good idea to do for that. And be kind and be loving while we help them to find their next opportunity.
Yep.
That's a difficult thing.
For sure.
But it has to happen. And we have to realize that, in business, sometimes ending relationships is important.
Yep.
And people don't like to do that. And so communicate one way when you're really getting clear on what we need to do. Then how we need to present it, there's that empathic communication we want to have. Um,
Mm, yeah.
one
So there's two levels you're talking about there: the what we're doing, but then the how. How do we execute that? How do
Absolutely,
we how do
absolutely,
we figure that out? That's good.
yeah. And who are we? Who's our audience?
Yep. Yep.
Right? We're not yelling at an employee that's not performing.
Right.
We're we're talking to them and coaching them, and if they're not performing even after the coaching, then we're
Yep.
coaching them on next job, and
Yep.
so it's always a coaching conversation, and coaching them to maybe find what's really going to feed them, because sometimes
Yep.
it just doesn't work. um,
Right.
we got to look at that stuff, and we got to be aware of it. um,
Yeah. For sure.
and so I'm
That's
not
good.
sure how I got off on that, but it was important.
I don't know either, but hey, it's good stuff. So that's all right. But yeah, I mean, there's that sense of as well recognizing. I think for so many leaders, when they make a decision like that, they just feel bad, or they feel shame, or they feel and they fail to realize, okay, this person is not thriving at this job. There may be someplace better for them. So you're hopefully actually caringly releasing them to go find where they would thrive, because this
Right.
isn't it. And whether
And,
that's because they're not performing or because they really don't meet your cultural, your values, and so they don't live up to that. That's that point where it's like, hey, there's a place that's a better fit for you, and this isn't it. And so
right.
let us help you expedite getting there, rather than saying, hey, well, we're just going to endure this for a long time. No, let's not do that. Let's help you get where you will thrive, and that's going to help us thrive as well. And so we can
Yeah.
have those caring, kind relationships and conversations with people even when they're leaving. I love the example of Alan Mullally, who would confront executives at Ford who've been there longer than he was, and they're like, "Well, I'm not getting on board with this," and he says, "Well, that's fine. We still love you. You can't work here, but we still love you." And it's just like, hey, I'm not at odds with you. I don't dislike you, but if you're not on board with where we're going, you can't work here.
And when they
And you
started to
won't get
understand that particular thing, all of them stayed
Hmm.
for a while.
Yep. Yep.
And that was a very interesting thing. And Michael Whalen actually has another comment, and he says, "My firm fires one client every 4 or 5 years." Uh, is it the same client, or but bring them back on and fire them again? But the relationship stops being productive, and there's no realistic rescue option. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And it's funny because the client that I'm talking about, if you look at it, my client is not aligned. Well, they're aligned with what I'm saying, but they're frightened to take action on what I'm asking them to do. But it's almost a parallel process, because she gets alignment with her manager that needs to go, and then there's no execution. And so it's like, hey, there's a little parallel process here. The
Yeah.
execution isn't happening on their end because they're not actually going to ever be the high performer we're looking for. My client is not executing because of the emotional impact.
Yep.
And so it's really interesting. Uh,
I love Michael's reply there, just talking about how most executive rescue plans don't always, there's not change really usually, and it leads to a divorce, a separation, right? And I
yes,
think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think that's part of, we go back to alignment. One of the reasons we want to work with an organization to get all of that clarity down and the alignment down is so you don't go through that. So you're actually doing your hiring process based on your clarity of who we are. And so we have alignment on the way in. We're not sitting there missing, and all of a sudden now we've got to go through a really expensive replacement process of an executive on the executive team, which is highly expensive. Instead,
yes,
we want to say, hey, how are you actually, do you have your clarity in place, your culture in place, your why, and your how do we behave, your values, your core values that you say these are non-negotiable. And so we want to make sure the person steps in here, gets it. And then the rest of it, that they understand, okay, what is your role? What do we do? And how are you going to fit in that? That's all vital to get before you ever cross the line of hiring. And
absolutely.
that way we limit the amount of loss we have on the back end of having to change executives again and again, or change team members again and again. And so
Yes,
that's one of those places, the clarity, the alignment is vital. Otherwise, you're
absolutely.
going to spend a lot of money for no reason.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I have found is that when we get agreement and we think we have alignment, we forget to check to see how the progress is going.
Mm.
And so as a result, we week 1, week 2, week 3, and we forget to go, how's that going? And
Yeah.
as a result, we don't have the change we're looking for at the speed we're looking for because we're not doing regular check-ins. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that Christine and I do when we're talking to these clients is really focus on what the deadlines is. And honestly, that's mostly Christine, her DT-ness.
Mm.
She really does bring that, okay, what's the time frame we're doing this in? And
Mm.
what's it gonna look like when we're done? And then really help them to stick to something by giving them a time, a date, and what it's going to look like when we have accomplished this.
Mm.
And I found that when we added that to working with our clients, especially in decision making, it makes it much easier
Yeah.
to execute or to stay on track with the timeline. But the one thing that I was really impressed with was when we started asking them to talk about what it was going to look like when they did the activity
Yeah.
and really feel what it's going to feel like when you've got that accomplished, is they started moving into the better feeling of that accomplishment rather than the fear of doing it. They'd
Mm.
be able to experience the freedom, the relaxation because they don't have it in front of them. They can experience in their own mind the problem being gone. Okay,
Mm.
great. When are we going to do it by? And so
Mm.
it's
That's
a little
good.
bit of future pacing, what it's going to be like when you've accomplished this goal, what it's going to be like when you've accomplished this very, very difficult conversation you're going to have, and then how can we help you do that?
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing you say that, and I'm thinking there's a help in that that's a collaborative process, right? Because we can all come up with all the positives that are ahead, and so as we sit there and talk about that together, there's a momentum that builds toward that, right? And an emotional connection around it. And now, hey, that beauty is forming because we're all talking about it. We're all laying out ideas. We're all laying out thoughts, and so it's giving us a clear picture of, hey, what could this really look like? That's great.
Exactly.
And I love so. Folks, if you haven't heard us saying, again, Terry's example there of Christine's work of saying, hey, we got to have some accountability here. We've got to have, what is the plan? Where are the steps? Where are the check-ins? And I think, again, what does that talk about? It talks about clarity. We need to be really clear, both from the top of why do we exist? What do we do? Who are, how do we behave? Those sorts of things. But then that clarity continues to move down and get fleshed out more and more and more, that when we communicate, we've got to communicate with clarity that, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is how we're going to play that out at each level of the organization and at each level of decision making. And then leaving meetings, leaving those times together with others with a really clear path is vital. So those are key pieces of making sure, do we really have alignment, or do we just agree so we can get out of the room? So we can, because I mean, the common mantra is people hate meetings, right? And so people want to get out of them. And so but the push in is, hey, let's make them valuable. Let's make them
Absolutely.
worth some.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a key piece. As we leave today, we want to leave you with that. You need clarity. And there's a lot of great people that can help. So a lot of times you need a facilitator to help you get started on that process because you're so ingrained in what you've been doing. And so I would just encourage you, if that's something that you see a struggle with your team on, reach out to one of us, reach out to someone else who could be a really helpful facilitator in that. If you need a connection through the Organizational Health Collective, we've got a lot of connections in a lot of areas. So if it's not us, it could be someone else as well. We can help connect with folks. So,
absolutely.
any
Our
final
friend
thoughts?
Michael Whalen, he's a great consultant as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See you next time. Have a great day.